Welcome, everybody, to episode 275 of WordPress Weekly for Wednesday, May 31st, 2017. I'm your host, Jeff Chandler, joined by the one and only J Trip, Triple J.
Hello.
You have so many names.
Too many. There's at least three I've been given that, I guess nicknames count.
How you doing, sir? How's your week going?
Pretty good. The weather's been good. It finally stopped raining here, so the bugs are out now, and I'm inside, so they're not really bothering me. So everything's okay. I installed a new mailbox, and working on as much core stuff as I can. So everything's great.
Still wondering if somehow I can get into Kismet from my mailbox, from my real life mailbox. There's so much junk mail.
That makes me want to have a sound roll so that we can have a drum roll so I can a soundboard so because that's terrible.
All right, so we don't have any guests lined up today. However, we do have some things that we need to talk about, including one that has some. It's quite the discussion topic in the WordPress community as of late, and we'll get into that in a little bit. However, I want to read an iTunes review that we received on the show. This was from Michael Carnell. He gave us 5 stars, April 11th. And he says, WP Weekly is a great way to spend the time on his daily bus ride to work. And not only does he get to stay up on all the latest WordPress news, interviews, plugins, and gossip, but it also whitens his teeth, grows hair on his balding head, and tightens his abs while he listens. Wow. I had no idea we had that kind of effect.
You have that effect. I have 275th.
Oh, that's right. In addition to making him more productive with WordPress, this podcast has also made him more popular with members of the opposite sex. Well, Hey, that's okie dokie. But he says, seriously, though, good stuff and a great way to stay up to date. Keep up the good work, guys. Thank you very much, Michael, for listening to the show and for that review. And for anyone else out there, please, if you could take some time out of your day right now or whenever, if you're after you mow the lawn, after you get out of the car, please review this show on iTunes. Give us 1 star, give us 5 stars, give us however many you think we deserve, and let us know what you think about the show. Very much appreciate it. So with that being said, why don't we dive into this week's news? And first item up for discussion is WordPress turning 14 years old. So there you go. WordPress is, turned 13. It's teenage years. Now it's 14. Interesting post by Matt Mullenweg on WordPress's birthday where he says that the interface he used to write the post was in Calypso, which is completely unrecognizable from what WordPress looked and worked like even a few years ago. And something I thought was interesting, he says 14 years in, he still wakes up every day excited about what's coming next for the project. The progress of the editor, the CLI, he says so far this year has been awesome, and he's looking forward to that flowing into improvements for customization and the REST API, which, ironically, all those things are the 3 core focuses for this year. So he says, thanks to Mike for kicking off this crazy journey and all the people into making WordPress better. And Constantine and Eric gave him a surprise birthday cake with a candle on it. So he was pretty happy about that. And John, I know that you published something on Twitter where you said if you do a search for WordPress birthday, there's a lot of interesting things that people were doing. I saw a nice little video by the employees of WP Engine that talked about what WordPress meant for them. And I also saw some, there's a lot of talented cake designers out there. I noticed there's a lot of really cool pictures of WordPress birthday cakes. And there were people, once again, all over the world celebrating WordPress's birthday with birthday cakes, with meetups, and some of these meetups were packed based on some of the pictures I saw. And it was just kind of a cool reminder of the international reach that this project has and its effect on people.
It was huge. It was an outpouring of celebration that was on Twitter with cakes and videos and, like you said, meetups and tons of people. I mean, it was. I went all the way back to stuff from last year, just on Twitter alone, and there were hundreds and hundreds of Twitter updates and photos and links to videos and blog posts and everything. So it was really, really cool just to see how many people got behind celebrating the day that WordPress was originally released. I thought it was really cool. I don't know, it was exciting.
Indeed, indeed. And next year, WordPress will be 15 years old, so it'll probably be even bigger of a celebration because 10 years when WordPress turned 10. Now, that was a worldwide celebration. I actually went to a WordPress birthday party down in Kent, and I'll never forget that night because on the way home, my alternator died. So I had to get a tow truck ride home.
So this marks the 4-year anniversary of your alternator dying. We should be celebrating. Should have been celebrating that instead.
Unbelievable, yeah. But again, really cool. Just as a reminder of what this project means to so many people across the world, and like I said, a lot of neat looking birthday cakes out there. So, with that said, WordPress has removed HHVM, or as some people know it, Hip Hop Virtual Machine, from the testing infrastructure. So before PHP 7, before the release of PHP 7 in 2015, there's a lot of WordPress managed hosting companies that looked to Facebook's HHVM. They were the original sort of creators of this software to provide better performance, and some of the web hosts out there, Pagely, WP Engine, SiteGround, were among some of the first to add HHVM hosting options to their plans. However, PHP 7 performance gains have been enough to preclude wider HHVM adoption. So I guess what the WordPress core team has done is they have this thing called a Travis test suite. Say that 3 times fast. And they've removed HHVM support from it after April 2017, because according to update stats, there's only about several dozen websites that were running on HHVM. Now, I remember HHVM touted as the next big thing. There was so much hype around it. Everybody started adopting it, and now 2 years later, it's like just a distant memory because of the performance that's now in PHP 7.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. The thing with HHVM that I thought at the time was interesting is that it really was intended to be a drop-in kind of replacement for PHP in general. Plus, it ran Hack, and it ran like different alternative syntaxes for PHP and all this other stuff. And the fascinating psychological part of something like HHVM, I think, reminds me a lot of WordPress in the way that people are not quick to adopt something when there is already sort of a canonical solution for it. Like, HHVM is cool, and it was fast, and it offered all these other extra really awesome things, and everyone tried it and played around with it. Myself, totally guilty. It was fast. I ran it on my own blog for a number of months. But the moment that PHP 7 sort of officially announced the performance improvements that they had gotten out of PHP, and we had put in the work necessary to make sure that WordPress itself would run with PHP 7, BuddyPress and BabyPress included in that, it was like a no-brainer. Like, we will just continue down the path of using the PHP, and like HHVM was fun, but it doesn't make any sense to use it anymore. And so it's kind of a funny segue, I think, into something else that I know that is on our agenda to talk about today is the JavaScript framework debate. And so, like what is it? I think we know that when something is adopted into WordPress core, it is more likely to be used than if it was a third-party thing or a fork of WordPress like Backpress was, or anything else. So I think it's cool and it's innovative to take something and push the boundaries with it, but more often than not, pushing those boundaries is one of those things that you do out of necessity and not necessarily because it's like valuable or 100% indicative of the direction that all these projects are going. So it's good to see that for the most part, our love affair, our fling with HHVM is mostly over, because and if something happens in the future where somebody or Facebook or anybody else has a version or a fork or a drop-in replacement for PHP that offers other improvements in different ways. I think what we've seen is that the PHP team is committed to sussing out those performance improvements also, and they want to see them happen, and they are open to adopting them and moving forward. So I think it's kind of been a win-win for everybody in all directions. So
Scott Taylor, a WordPress core contributor, made quite a few improvements to core about 3 years ago for better HHVM compatibility. And while this support is not being removed, simply the testing for it is just going to be removed from the testing infrastructure. Now, if you're still running HHVM, you're highly encouraged to upgrade to PHP 7, just because many of the performance improvements, it actually performs better than HHVM. And one of the interesting things here by John Blackburn, a core contributor, is he says that the PHP world owes a lot to HHVM for helping it push it forward. And without HHVM, maybe we wouldn't have seen such incredible performance gains in PHP 7. I thought that was sort of a nice nod to what HHVM did for PHP.
Yep, it's absolutely true. When what Facebook was able to accomplish with HHVM back then was just really cool. It was kind of unprecedented to see. It kind of came out of nowhere. It's the equivalent of there being, a drop-in replacement for the engine in your car. Someone just says, "Hey, we've made it faster, and you get better gas mileage, and it's just better all the way across the board. And you can just drop it in, and for the most part, it'll totally run exactly the same way, and you get it for free, and you don't have to worry about anything going forward." It was incredible. I think at the time when it came out, it was like, well, there's no way it can really be that good. And then it turned out that it kind of was that good. And it came with its own quirks. HHVM had its own weird, different issues and things you had to do to keep it running, or kickstart it again if it ever ran out of memory or whatever else. But John is absolutely right that these types of innovations they push everything forward, and they do make everything better. I totally agree.
All right, John, I want you to put on your hard hat. I want you to turn on the lights. I'm going to put mine on as well. We're going to get in the harness, and we're going to start going down the rabbit hole that is JavaScript frameworks. When Matt Mullenweg said, "Learn JavaScript deeply" during his WordPress State of the Word, one of the first questions I think that people had on their mind was, okay, which framework? And to that, I think it was during the Q&A somebody actually asked him, and he said, stick to pure JavaScript, because all of the frameworks have one thing in common, and that's JavaScript, the pure language. So if you learn JavaScript, you'll probably be set for all the other frameworks. But there was going to be a time where the day was going to come where perhaps a decision was going to be made on which JavaScript framework core would adopt and use, and sort of be the de facto one that is used to build new features. And within the WordPress community as of late, there's been a couple of different discussions surrounding which core or which JavaScript framework should be used for WordPress core. And as of late, the discussion is between React.js versus Vue.js. And there are a lot of facets to this conversation, a lot of different spokes to this. It comes down to ease of use or ease of learning, getting involved with it, to how is it used on large-scale projects, its long-term, its longevity. I think Vue is a one-man show, and React has corporate backed with Facebook. And then there's the issue of the patent clause that is on React because of Facebook. Vue is just pretty much an open source license. You don't have to worry about patents. There's a lot riding on this decision. And where do we start, John?
Oh boy. Gosh. It's really tough to make decisions like this, like these types of decisions, especially when they're brought up in a community sense where everybody's input is sort of, I'd say, required for a decision that's this big. It's really tough. It's along the lines of, when when WordPress themes were first a thing, there were PHP templates already. There was Smarty was probably the most popular one, and even when shortcodes were brought in, BB code was an equivalent type of API, and so generally and historically, WordPress kind of goes its own way. It says, well, we can take what we know about the way that these other things work, and let's implement our own flavor or our own versions of those things. And most recently, when the media UI was refreshed by Daryl Coopersmith back in probably 2010, 11, Underscore and Backbone were both pulled in and included as sort of the JavaScript du jour to help us accomplish those tasks in the best and easiest ways. And for the most part, people have implemented Backbone and Underscore and used them for other various things within WP Admin, and they're both fantastic JavaScript libraries for what they do and for what we needed them for at the time. And so now, with the popularity of React and the web sort of shifting and changing around to be more front-end centric than it is sort of server-side, it's more client-side now, and React tends to be the library that most projects lean on and use for handling all that client-side rendering of the user interface style of the things that people interact with. So what do we do now? Do we choose React because it just happens to be the winner today? I mean, we can look back in history and say Backbone and Underscore were the winners back then. We can look and say TinyMCE has done us is really well for the past few years, but is it time to move on to something else, or do we keep it? Even back with Flash and using SWF upload for the multi-file uploader, most of the stuff has stuck around, but there are times where things got put into WordPress proper that were then later completely stripped out. Like Google Gears, for example, was the way to optimize all of the assets locally so that you'd have them real quick and compiled for locally so that you wouldn't have to go out and fetch all of WordPress's assets. But when Google announced that they were going to stop supporting for Gears, we had to strip Gears support out of WordPress completely in like 2.5 or 2.6 or whatever that was. And so this is a big deal. And when Coop needed Underscore and Backbone, it was a smaller conversation. It was, well, these are the things that are popular now. These are the things that are going to solve the problem. And if nobody disagrees, then let's just pull them in. And that was kind of the decision back then. And now is a different ball game. There's the JavaScript front end framework wars have been going on for a while, and it's traditionally been React versus Angular, and then pros and cons in every direction. And then React kind of seems to have won that war, I think. But React doesn't necessarily best represent the needs or ideologies of WordPress core or plugins or themes across the board. So, and there are more lightweight versions of React, like Preact, and
so now we have JavaScript frameworks of frameworks.
Pretty much, and React in and of itself is pretty simple. In order to make React do awesome things, it needs awesome extensions. And so including React alone kind of doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot until you start pulling things in, which is kind of what plugins and themes or WP admin would eventually do. So there's similarities and there's differences, and there's the patent clause thing I've looked into a little bit this afternoon because there were even some concerns about the similarities between Facebook and BuddyPress as a plugin, both being this sort of catering to a user-to-user interaction and socialization. But in my independent research, as a non-patent attorney, I'm not super concerned specifically about BuddyPress and patent-related things, but I do think that there's room for clarification in the way that Facebook's legal counsel has decided to word the way that the patent clause looks and what its intentions are. So it'll be interesting.
The issue of the patent clause was brought up last year in July, based on Automatic's use of it for Calypso, which is their sort of JavaScript kind of application that works with Facebook. And Paul Staminsky, who is the general legal counsel for Automatic, responded to a ticket that was created on GitHub, sort of raising the issue. And he said that Automatic had looked at the legal issues with Facebook's patent license on React. And he says that the termination provisions of the patent license aren't ideal, but are not a blocker to using React as part of Calypso. He also goes on to say that the termination provisions don't apply to the right to use the code, just the license included in the patents file. This license gives React users permission to use Facebook's patents on React, and Facebook's intentions in including this additional license are admirable. As they say here, and he links to a document, this grant was designed to ensure that developers can use our projects with confidence. And also, according to Szymanski, he says the companies with the greatest concern are those that have large patent portfolios and engage in offensive patent litigation, especially against Facebook. Automatic is not in that boat and has no plans to be, so we're comfortable with using React under its current license, he said. So that's Automatic's take on it. They're fine with using it. But there's this contingent of people, and it does seem strange that if React was chosen as the framework with this patent clause, that it seems strange that even with the patent clause, like it's opposite of the project's values of open source. It would be very awkward to have that kind of thing in core, supported by core. So there's a lot of people out there that are advocating for Vue just for the simple nature that you don't have to worry about that. There's no, React should be dismissed just on the basis of that patent clause, regardless of its technical abilities.
It's definitely a double-edged sword, no matter which one you pick, because if we look back at Underscore and Backbone, including something in, and even the REST API a little bit, including something in WordPress core is not a promise that those projects will see any increase in contribution or usage as a result. We've multi-site is maybe questionable. Maybe more people use multi-site because it's in WordPress core, but also debatable, I think. So React already has an insane amount of momentum, and it
also has an insane amount of people, organizations, teachers out there. There's all kinds of learning material surrounding React.
Yep. There's just so much that it's impossible to deny. And if we don't consider or even adopt React as a framework internally as a cultural shift, as a community, in the software project as a whole, and React continues the trajectory that it's on, then WordPress has missed the boat big time. And relying on every other plugin or theme to pull in its own version of React is actually a worse problem. That's why we include jQuery in WordPress core, because it means that no one has to include, or not everyone else has to include, their own version of jQuery going forward. But at the same time, if it's not exactly the right tool for the problem that we're trying to solve, then other solutions like Vue or Preact should be scrutinized and considered equally as much. But it's just as possible that we would say today that we think Vue is a better fit. Vue may or may not see more contributions upstream as a result. And then next year, React will be, the obvious choice. So you really can't predict the future, and so it's the only thing you can do is see what everybody thinks and feels, and try to suss out the real outlier, the real blockers, like the patent clause or anything else. And I don't really consider the patent clause to be a blocker or a problem, as much as I do. Just the general community feel of what happens if you don't include it and we look back on that as a tipping point or a mistake where maybe we should have. So
now, in a lot of these discussions, some of the core contributors have said that mainly the decision on what they're going to use revolves on how to make the core contributors' lives easier, how to make developing easier for core, which some members of the community were pretty upset at because they feel that this decision impacts a whole lot more people and areas than just core. And one of the factors that has been discussed is the ease of learning a framework. Vue has been touted by advocates as much easier to learn and to get started with versus React. However, the ease of learning this framework was not among the criteria contributors identified for selecting one. And one of the interesting things about this conversation is that if we select a framework, this is an opportunity for WordPress to be able to teach JavaScript to new users as it did with PHP, and then you would bring in people from the PHP world to work on WordPress, which that never really actually happened. What I think happened was WordPress used PHP, and then it did things its own way with PHP, and we ended up, developers got a hold of WordPress. They started to learn things like filters and hooks, which made it easy to tie in and do certain tweaks with WordPress. And over a number of years, maybe those developers learned the actual PHP language or how it works. But I've noticed that there's this separation between a WordPress developer and a PHP developer, that they're not necessarily one and the same. And there's no guarantee that depending on if core adopted a JavaScript framework, that with all the JavaScript that would be in core, that the same thing would happen, that we would actually bring in JavaScript developers, to people who work in that language, into WordPress core, because there hasn't been a history of that happening. I mean, we've had some contributions from the PHP community, but it seems like a mutual relationship.
I think what'll happen, I think the reality either way of whatever framework ultimately is decided upon, the reality of that decision will be that for a little bit, for a few weeks, for a few months, there will not be a lot that we will see happen as a result. And then once people are able to experiment and use React or use Vue for what they are and how they're included in WordPress, then we build upon that existing knowledge over and over and over and over again. And so the same thing has happened with WordPress on top of PHP. There are people that are WordPress developers that are maybe not totally fluent with PHP, and there are front-end developers that can play React like an instrument but could not write raw JavaScript if they needed to. And so I think that is the beauty of being a developer or writing code, is that all of these things are based on prior knowledge that you may or may not need to actually solve the problem that you're going to solve. So at the end of the day, I think whether React is easier to use at first than Vue is less important than the documentation that we're able to come up with, or the examples that we're able to come up with, to say, if you want to use either one of these things within the context of WP admin, within your plugin, within your theme, etc., that those examples or that those things be easy to use and understand, even if the core of React has a steeper learning curve. There are things in WordPress that have steep learning curves. The Rewrite Rules API, the Roles and Capabilities API, even the Customizer, to be honest, has a learning curve. And so integrating into it isn't about knowing raw JavaScript or knowing the most efficient PHP function to use. It's about leveraging the examples that come with WordPress core and seeing how WordPress uses the Customizer already to then use that as your foundation in your own plugin and theme to extend what you want to do going forward. So I think it's more about how deeply and quickly that the WordPress core team or that contributors adopt the framework than it is about which framework ultimately that we decide upon. That's important also, but how that looks once it's implemented, I think is is more deterministic of whether or not WordPress users will be happy with the decision.
And to some of our listeners out there, you may be wondering or asking yourself, well, why is there this need to choose a JavaScript framework to begin with? Why can't WordPress just use pure JavaScript? And I think I think
that's a valid question, honestly, because a lot of React and front end things, a lot of the functionality that surrounds React overlaps typical WordPress functionality, like rewrite rules and routes and those kind of things. So even someone who's loosely educated about what React is and what the surrounding extensions to React are, it's a valid question. What does React actually bring to the table because of the amount of functionality that WordPress already comes packaged with, and the overlap that a client side of a browser side rendering engine needs to reinvent in almost every single way. Translations is another one of those. WordPress comes with a getText API, but in order to do front end JavaScript based translations, it needs a completely different dependency tree to do translations client side that don't actually touch the server. It's a completely different set of code. It's unrelated to what WordPress already comes included with. So it's a valid question across the board for like many, many different reasons. I'm sorry to interrupt. Please.
No. I think it's a valid question. One that I had when I was reading these debates. And by the way, speaking of these, debates or discussions, I want to say that Ryan McHugh, one of the WordPress core contributor, one of the fellows who works on a WordPress REST API, he's been moving forward with having these discussions in the community. Mm-hmm. And there is this feeling amongst those who are participating in these discussions and thinking about frameworks that the decision has already been made, that these discussions are sort of you're not getting anywhere with them, because if we look back, Matt Mullenweg has stated that React, at least for Automatic and Calypso, was his long-term bet. Calypso, I believe Gutenberg is using React. Many of the people on the core team, they have a lot more experience with using React than Vue or other frameworks. And so, a lot of developers are wondering why are we having these discussions in the first place if it seems like React is a foregone conclusion as to what core is going to select.
So I think I have the answer to that, honestly. And I think that it is really easy to have your mind made up about something. I think it's very natural to say, I've only driven Hondas my entire life, and so I'll never buy a Subaru. Like, it's really easy to say, this is my favorite type of pizza, and so I'm not going to try Hawaiian because I really like pepperoni or whatever. Like, I think it's really a natural state of mind to not consider what the alternatives look like, because we have kind of solved these problems internally for ourselves already. And so I think the reason why it feels like the decision to choose React has already been made is kind of because it kind of has been made, right? Like, everyone has already tried it, has already enjoys it, is already working in it. Or not everyone, but the majority of people, many people are finding working with React to be largely positive. And so with the amount of work that's gone into it and with the teams of people that have used it, the decision to use React seems like a pretty obvious one. The reason to not just blindly include React and say that as a community or as a project we're going to use React is because we respect each other's opinions and we open these ideas up for scrutiny. I have an idea. This is an open source community. It is not just about what I want. It's about what we all want. And so let's talk about it. It really is a huge sign of respect and admiration and appreciation for other people's perspectives and where they come from. And it really, I think, speaks dividends to why open source is awesome, why the WordPress community in general really embraces a lot of the respectful qualities of an open source project and continues to thrive, because If the alternative is to just do what seems natural and obvious, then we lose out completely on the debate or the discussion or the scrutiny. And that's when I think people really get upset. The fact that we're able to openly talk about these things is because we all enjoy working together and appreciate each other's opinions.
I do want to highlight the fact that official decision has not been made. So which framework WordPress has decided to adopt is still up in the air. Things are still being discussed. They're taking their time with this, which is nice. Contributors have said, who are involved in the decision, have said that they will preserve the ability for theme and plugin developers to use any framework they choose to build for their products, which I think is definitely key. So no matter what WordPress chooses to use for core, plugin developers can choose to use that library, or if they're comfortable with Vue or some other different framework, this decision won't stop them from using their favorite framework.
That's exactly right.
And it's another part of this discussion is right now, as we sort of mentioned, JavaScript frameworks. There used to be one every week. I don't know if that trend is still there, but they're developing at lightning pace. They're evolving very quickly. And there's a couple of people, I think jokingly, but I think also seriously, who have said that, we're having this discussion now. And if we make a decision now, we're going to have this discussion again in 3 to 5 years time, which is, I don't know, kind of crazy. So, I mean, what's going to happen in 3 to 5 years time? We have to talk about another JavaScript framework?
Probably. I mean, it's where if anything, we should feel pretty lucky that for the most part, no one is talking about the next thing to replace PHP or WordPress or MySQL or anything else. The fact that we have such a stable foundation enables us to have this reinvention and rediscovery of what the front end of the web should look and feel like. And so I think it's okay. It's healthy to have those discussions every few years. I mean, it really, after everything went jQuery, it took a long time to make the decision to pull Prototype back out. WordPress came with Prototype and maybe MooTools. I don't remember if MooTools was in
I remember
or not.
MooTools.
But it eventually, when everyone decided, well, no one's really using these things anymore, and jQuery seems to be the thing that where everyone is doubling down on, then let's wait and see and look through the plugin repository, and let's try and recommend everyone upgrade everything into being jQuery, because we're officially endorsing jQuery as the way going forward. And then eventually, the Prototype was no longer included in WordPress core. So is it possible 3 years from now that we would look and say, oh, well, React was not a good idea. Nobody used it and it was too complicated or whatever else. And so let's look at something else. Sure, possibly. Or is it possible a new version of React might have breaking changes and we have to upgrade a version of React and we have to shim the old version? I mean, we did that with jQuery already. jQuery comes with a migration script to make sure that old jQuery works with new jQuery. I think it's a very natural progression of how these things improve and get better over time. So yes, if we have this discussion today, I hope that we have this discussion again 3 years from now, because it will be a different environment probably.
And if you were involved in making this decision and one JavaScript framework is backed by one person and has some contributors and is used on a couple of different large-scale sites, like Alibaba, I think, uses Vue. They've created a version of Vue called Weeks. They have their own framework, versus a corporate-backed project in React. How does that influence your decision?
So for me, specifically, I've always thought that the team at Facebook does a really good job of being open and open sourcing the things that they're building and including people in the innovations that they're working on. Now, they have proprietary stuff too, and I know that Facebook is the big machine that everyone likes to be critical about, and that's okay. But the development team behind the things that they're building have, in general, been really open and forthcoming and friendly and inviting and nice with the technologies that they're building. So as far as individuals and teams that are open sourcing the cool stuff that they're doing. Facebook as an organization is not a bad company to have backing the thing that you are considering using. That said, I think that any official endorsement helps. When and BuddyPress and BBPress, I think, are both examples of that, where being official sister projects to WordPress only elevates BuddyPress and BBPress and GlotPress as plugins. If they were not officially endorsed, then they just don't have the exposure. They don't have the good faith of longevity. And so it makes competitors, it makes it hard to compete against them. And whether that's an unfair advantage, whether that is spiritually good or bad, these are all questions that we can talk about. But I think it only helps a project to have something behind it. Same with WordPress. Having automatic behind it is a net win. It will always be a net positive that automatic be behind the WordPress project. And other companies like 10up and Human Made and everybody, like other companies being behind WordPress also helps. The New York Times, Time Magazine, whoever else uses it, the bigger the name and the bigger the commitment is, the better that these projects will always look. And so it makes projects like Vue, it makes them hard for Vue to compete, even if it's really, really, really awesome. It makes it hard because it just doesn't have the promise of longevity, like and the commitment that a company or an organization like Facebook or Automatic or Human Made or whatever can make or put towards it. It's the same thing with Vagrant. Like Vagrant came out of nowhere and helped a lot of people out. And the HashiCorp, the company behind Vagrant, has multiple other tools and things that they work as part of their suite of software. And so it's nice that they are an organization that has multiple tools that is committing to the ongoing development of Vagrant. And so it makes it, for appearance's sake even, I think most of us look at it and go, oh, yeah, that's cool that, this thing has this much support. So it makes Vue tough. It makes it a tough choice,
and
even if it's better.
And before we wrap it up here on this topic, we received a number of good comments on this article on WPTavern.com. And Rarst, he's a pretty smart fella. I like him. I like when he comments on things. And he was responding to a quote where it says WordPress becomes a platform for teaching JavaScript to new programmers. And Rarst responded that he says, no, it won't, just like it did not become an application platform, a web operating system, or whatever else, a grandiose label of the year. And he says, by this point, WordPress has grown into its peak comfortable role, legacy framework for content sites, an obsolete dialect of PHP. And he also goes on to say, and there's a huge problem that we are routinely not honest about this. One solution cannot be simultaneously be chained to absolute backwards compatibility with a decade plus of code and be a flexible, cutting-edge, trendy platform. Says the great idea of JavaScript bailing WordPress out of its legacy is utopian and is my strong wish it wasn't pushed so hard. It bends internal perception of the project for worse, and it comprises decisions like this one. I don't know if you have any thoughts on what he said there.
I don't disagree, honestly. I think a legacy code base that has as much effort and time into it and decisions that are made underneath it and patches and shims and compatibility for PHP versions and all those things. Again, it's like having Facebook behind your project is really, really awesome until it's not. And so having 14 years worth of problems solved and decisions made and confidence in WordPress is really, really awesome until it's not. And so the web in general shifted its emphasis and popularity sort of away from the server side of things, because to be honest, languages like PHP and Python have largely and web servers like Apache and Nginx and Go and have largely solved those problems. And in order to do more of the more complex type of web app based things, JavaScript server side required Node. Someone had to build it in order to do it because PHP and Python just weren't able to get into this multi-threaded JavaScript sort of asynchronous handling of things, even if PHP does have some support for multi-requests underneath it. I forget what it's called. I think Python does too, but Node came, reinvented the web for a new generation, and as a result, the requirements for the web and front-end development have completely flipped and changed. And so all of our legacy code, the decisions that we have, the PHP of it all, the only thing that WordPress can really do to stay relevant and to attract the crowd of developers that are familiar with JavaScript and Node and front-end development is to give them the foundation that they're using. I think Rarst is usually right about these kind of things, and so I tend to agree.
Legacy framework for content sites sounds like a depressing state of affairs for
So,
WordPress.
you know-
we have. So it took 4 years for the team to work really hard on getting us to a point where we have a REST API. Now we're talking about JavaScript frameworks. We're PHP 7. And it seems like there's an effort towards building in these developer tools, these languages, perhaps providing an opportunity for WordPress to reinvent itself. But I don't know. I won't say is it possible, but can WordPress reinvent itself in time to be this relevant thing again?
I hope. I mean, I don't think that it's not relevant today, but it's where with WordPress's recent emphasis on tooling is sort of it's kind of sad that we didn't have any of those tools in the first place, because most projects did or started with those tools, and then things like having Travis CI and having tests and test coverage and focusing on having unit tests for things are pretty standard practice in like every other piece of software ever around the world for the history of software. So the fact that WordPress had to sort of backfill those things and was able to do so, to be honest, in a relatively elegant manner that also still works for plugins and themes is a feat in and of itself that no one really seems to credit the efforts behind. But long story short is I don't feel like WordPress isn't relevant at all. I think WordPress is super relevant, but that there is a pretty strict divide between what does a person or a teenager or even an adult who's just getting in to writing code for the web choose. And if the path is really strictly divided between server-side PHP or client-side Node and React, then I think most people would say go server-side and React, because the people say the goal most of the time is to get a job. What's going to make me as an individual attractive for someone to pay, right? And I think JavaScript is clearly that. So if it's a problem, or if it's a concern about relevancy, then WordPress including React is as much of a gesture as it is to say you can still write a bunch of all of the same JavaScript the way that you would want to, and have WordPress as part of that application or stack or whatever else too. So I think it's really, really important.
It's funny you mentioned, because we've talked about that before, and I've talked about that with some of the younger people I've known in the WordPress community, about people who are up and coming developers. They're the next generation perhaps of WordPress developers, and wondering if they consider WordPress cool, the software project to kind of bite into, to get their feet wet on PHP and JavaScript. Is it the cool software project to really get involved in? Now, I don't have an answer for that, but from a couple of the young people I've talked to, they say, no, it's not. That they want to enjoy something that has, an MVC and all these cool new hip technologies, a la Drupal 8. You know,
Mm-hmm.
kind of all the
It's
cool stuff that Drupal 8's built into it is like a lot of the stuff that the people coming out of college that are being taught programming, you know, they really want to get into.
hmm There's a lot of psychology that goes behind that, and the reputation is tricky because if you emphasize reputation, then you'll never actually get anything done. You'll just be paranoid about whether or not people like you, and that's not a good way to spend your time. You should be spending your time on building awesome, and if you're building awesome stuff, then naturally, hopefully, people come to figure out that your reputation is positive because you actually deserve it. So I think like public schools are tough too because most public schools don't teach PHP or Python or JavaScript or any of that. They still teach Visual Basic or they teach like what Robot R, right? Like some other a version of robotics because it's what high schools, public schools have robotics meets and stuff, and so they're learning how to code, but they're not being taught the type or the syntax or the style of coding that actually translates to a real world application or job or whatever else. And that's not unusual. Think back to your experience in public school. And even though you had health and home ec, you may have cooked a cake, but it didn't. That's when you cook a cake today, you don't think back to home ec. You read the recipe, you read the instructions, and you try not to screw it up. Like
When I think of home ec, I think of that awesome grilled cheese sandwich I made.
Well, I hope that someday I get to experience the Jeffro grilled cheese home ec sandwich because it sounds awesome.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just I agree with you on reputation. It's not really a thing to focus on, but you know, it's just an interesting thing to talk about with the younger generation, the next generation of WordPress developers. And one of the, you know, since we're talking about all this dev stuff, I wanted to bring this up just because I was thinking about it the other day. And I don't know if it's a trend. I think it's a trend, but maybe it's not. Maybe I'm delusional. You could tell me. Maybe it's not related, but it seems to me in the last 2 years or so that there's been a lot of focus on tools, local environments, services, and the like aimed at developers. Maybe not just WordPress developers, although there's a lot of stuff around WordPress developers, but developers in general. So between SaaS and Elastic, Composer, Sublime, JavaScript frameworks, WordPress schedulers, REST API, it's like the pendulum has swung from a focus on end user stuff from about 5 years ago to WordPress developer stuff. And I just wanted to bring it up and see if maybe you've noticed the same thing or am I on to something?
I know you. I totally agree, and I'll be honest that as it triggers my ADHD really hardcore because there is so much to each one of these tools that we need to support and embrace and endorse, and they are useful and powerful. But I never feel like I fully comprehend the rules behind how every single one of them work. And I think it for sure raises the barrier to entry to making anything happen quickly. It definitely when we implemented our unit test suite and we embraced SAS for BuddyPress, and when we moved everything around to work inside of PHP unit and integrate it with Travis CI and all of the documentation testing and code sniffing and all these things that are all automated tests online. The result of one commit and Grunt and SAS and pre-compiling all these things together and running the tasks, like these are all new responsibilities that are part of a process that is something that I haven't needed to do for 10 years. Oh, welcome to 5 new things you have to do every single time you want to do one thing. You want to change one piece of CSS. You need to run Grunt. You need to push those changes back upstream. You need to make sure that they all pass. You need to, if the tests complain somewhere and they push a notice to Slack, you need to check and see what broke or what isn't working anymore and fix that thing and da-da-da-da-da. And so it's not that they're not useful, because they are useful tools, but it was for me a big adjustment in how I performed my job. And to that end, it's important that even if it's uncomfortable, that we all roll with those changes and embrace them as much as we can. Because to be honest, if these are the only changes that we experience in the project or in our lives or in our jobs in working or on WordPress core or contributing upstream or anything else, then we are still experiencing like 1,000,000% fewer changes than your average person does in a corporate environment or in a bigger company or corporation where they're laying off tons of people and hiring and firing and moving and absorbing and bringing in new companies and merging and relocating and all these things. Like, these changes are for the better, even if they are mildly annoying, and while the learning curve is still against you. So yes, I think you're 100% right that all of these tools do slow down the development process for people that need to learn how they work. But eventually, these things become ubiquitous and invisible and not really a problem. And so we just got to go through the messy process of implementing those tools where no one else will really have to go through that going forward.
Yeah, so I'm beginning to think that maybe this is cyclical, where all these new developer things are coming out and things to play with, and the ones that people get to grips with, end up getting sort of this little bit of a mass adoption. Some of them, rise to the top, and then we start seeing an influx of new end user focused services, plugins, proponents, all because of this new stuff that the developers have learned with all these tools and stuff. So I just got to weather the storm, because I'm an end user. I'm not into all this cool local server environment, VVV, Vagrant, and all that other mumbo jumbo technical stuff. I want to experiment and use this stuff, the cool stuff that people are creating with other dev tools. So I'm waiting for the pendulum to swing the other way, and I wonder how long that's going to take.
When I was learning PHP, I used WAMP. I was on a Windows machine, and you installed WAMP, and you got Apache, MySQL, PHP, Turnkey, and it worked, and it was great, and you didn't have to worry about it, and that was all that there was. And when I started doing more stuff like live on a server and was actually re-educating myself about command line Linuxy type things, probably 15 or 20 years ago at this point, then eventually you can find articles online that are like, oh, well, if you just want to run PHP and you want to run MySQL or whatever else on your Mac, just pull these things down. You can run it locally. It's super easy. But the reality is that it's only super easy if you already know how to do it. There are like programs like MAMP and MAMP Pro. You can pay for MAMP Pro. It's a pro product. It's been around forever. I still to this day prefer MAMP because that's what I've learned on was WAMP, and so they're very similar, and it feels to me like the experience that is the most compartmentalized and the easiest to use. It has the least problems. I have to maintain it a lot less than something like VVV or Docker instances or whatever else. And so they are cyclical, I think. I agree in that as new generations of people come around to try and solve new problems or the same old problems in new ways, you push the envelope a little bit. You push it in every direction, and you resolve the same problem in a different way to see how it works. And so as a result, you sort of forget about the problems that someone already solved before you, because you didn't have to solve those problems, they did. And so you just don't get the experience of having solved those problems because they weren't even presented to you until you had to identify them yourself. And so it's hard to say whether or not something like VVV or like WP Doc, or what's the one that 10up just came out with, was the Docker version of that. But whether or not it's better is completely relative. But it's different, and if it provides improvements to developers' lives, then I think they're all good things, but yeah, MAMP still like is where my heart is. I really still like MAMP and how easy it is to turn on and use and switch between PHP versions and add new local installs and whatever else. But in day to day, I use VVV for my local development and always have. There's a little bit of process addiction there, where like keeping my boxes up to date and keeping VirtualBox up to date and keeping Vagrant up to date and all there are a lot of things that like I feel I have to do manually in order to keep VVV up and running for myself that I didn't have to do with MAMP or something else. But it seems it's at least is a way to stay up to speed and relevant with what other people think is attractive and are using. And that by itself, I think, is more important than staying like old and curmudgeon and saying like, I'm sure VVV is awesome, but I'm going to stick over here with my MAMP. Because if you stick with the same old thing for too long, then literally the world will pass you by every 12 months. And so it's really important to stay adaptable, I think.
I'm just waiting on the developers to hurry up and learn REST API and JavaScript and whatever, because it's been 6 months now since the endpoints have been added to WordPress, and I've yet to play around with this cool new fancy headless WordPress app. I'm still waiting on those. I mean, those things were promised, as possibilities. So we're 6 months in. I still haven't seen a great use of the WordPress REST API in terms of like a refreshing new way of using WordPress. I mean, there's Calypso, but I'm looking for something completely different.
There is an argument to be made that having the REST API in WordPress core without something like React or Vue or Preact or whatever else is kind of like having a guitar without the strings. Like, you have the foundation there to have these endpoints readily accessible to people, but you don't actually have the interface built in to actually interact and make the guitar do what the guitar does. So I think once a front end framework is committed to, you will suddenly see the explosion of REST API interactive things that everyone had kind of hoped or promised would happen, because you just don't have all of the necessary equipment to make the REST API sing and sound the way that it should without doing just an enormous amount of upfront work, no different than a BuddyPress theme or something else. I mean, it's just a lot to take on. And if you're not sure what the foundation of that is going to be, if it's going to be React or Angular or Vue or something else, it makes the job slower and you kind of flounder around. So I think once we make a decision, you'll see a lot more things using the REST API.
Well, John, I see a light up ahead. Let's climb up a little. Let's climb up through it. Oh man, I can't believe it. We traveled through the rabbit hole and we ended up in the middle of a bike shed.
It's like a text game. You Jeff and John poke their heads out of the rabbit hole, only to discover that they've landed in a bike shed. What will they do next?
Yeah, and there's someone painting on each side of the bike shed. Is someone painting it a different color?
Exactly. Which side of the bike shed do they choose? The red, the blue, the green, the yellow, the orange? Why does this bike shed have 5 walls? What shape is this bike shed? What are we looking at here?
Anyways, that's a great discussion, important discussion, very important part. It's a very important time for WordPress right now. And if you want to keep tabs on that, there's going to be follow-up meetings. You can check out wptavern.com, where Sarah Gooding's been doing an awesome job on summarizing what's been going on the notes of the meetings. And let's get into our picks of the week. Let's move along here. Now, the pick I have is called wapu.us, wapu.us. It's created by James Tryon, and it's a place where you can discover, learn, and purchase Wapu items. So Wapu is the unofficial mascot of the WordPress project. And if you've never seen Wapu before, I don't know what to tell you. It's kind of reminiscent of a Pikachu, but there's also different versions of Wapu. Like there's a Wobster, A Wobster. That's pretty good. Leprechaun McWapu, 80s Pop Wapu. It's just a really cool, fun take on all these different cities. And Wapu is kind of taken off internationally after being created in Japan. And it gives you this cultural, local kind of identity to an area, to a place for these WordCamps. And if James has created some of this really cool swag based around Wapu, and he's got one of these cool things called a pin. It's an enamel pin. He's got all kinds of different ones, and I actually got to try one out or see one in person at WordCamp Chicago, and they're really good high quality, and they're pretty affordable as well. So if you're interested in checking out all the different Wapus, or you want some cool Wapu merchandise, like I don't know if he has. Oh yeah, he does have a plush Wapu. There you go. That'd be great with the kids. As we found out at WordCamp US.
WordCamp US, yeah, those were cool. I still have ours.
Mine's right over there, And I know he was a big hit with the kids. WordCamp US. So check it out. Wapu.us. It'll be in the show notes for you after the show. John, what do you got for us this week?
So I've got two, and I'm sure that I'm sure I could probably pick 10, but my two picks of the week, I picked two plugins. I picked Cavalcade, number one, by our friends at Human Made. Cavalcade's a plugin that essentially completely replaces WP cron. It's an API that is historically painful, specifically with multi-site, and the folks at Human Made work a lot with multi-site and work on some big brands and some cool stuff. And so we have recently switched to running Cavalcade for some stuff on WordPress.org, and it's pretty cool. So if you need to run big jobs, or you're running, you have a task runner, you have something that WordPress needs to interact with that you would traditionally use WP cron, you probably want to look at Cavalcade. It's pretty great. We'll include a link in the show notes. They have a GitHub repo. I don't know if it's on the plugin repo or not, because it's kind of an advanced plugin that does some stuff to work around WP cron in some different ways. So give it a look and check out their repo on GitHub. GitHub.com/humanmade/cavalcade.
To show you how old I am, when you say Cavalcade, I think of the pay-per-view event for WCW. For wrestling, World Championship Wrestling. That's how old I am. Anyways.
I don't think I watched WCW. I was mostly a WWF before they had to change to the WWE.
I was a channel flipper on Monday night, so I went back and forth. Anyways, I didn't mean to derail you.
My second pick is the Give plugin, which is WordPress.org/plugin/give, or givewp.com. They have a bunch of add-ons and stuff too, but I recently installed and have tried Give Out for powering my own personal project for core contributions on things. And so I did a quick code review of Give and some of the add-ons that they were kind enough to let me use and look at, and was pretty impressed. And the folks have been super nice, and their team has been really great. And so I kind of wanted to give a shout out to the folks at Give, because they've built a pretty good product with a really awesome team of people that are really trying to do some hard work and support of nonprofits and agencies that have interesting problems to solve that don't necessarily have really good software to solve it with. So they're etching out a niche, and I think are doing a great job. So that was my two picks are Cavalcade and Give.
Yeah, the Give plugin, not only is it a good plugin, but the people behind it are good people.
Because
Bridget Willer and Matt Cromwell, so the folks over there are really good people. So we don't have time to tell you what's on WordPress.tv this week. We'll tell you next week. However, we do want to let you know of a couple of events that are coming up, because we haven't done that in a while. This weekend, there's two WordCamps. WordCamp Lublin, which is in Poland, and WordCamp Asheville in North Carolina, which Asheville is a beautiful place. I've never been there, but I've heard from people who have been there. I've been close enough to Asheville, just on the other side of the Blue Ridge Parkway. Beautiful place if you ever get a chance to visit. Now's a good time as ever, with the WordCamp going on. And then June 10th and 11th is WordCamp Orange County, another great event. They do a pretty cool event out there called Plugin Palooza. So it's like a plugin developers contest out there. That's always a good event. And then the big one before WordCamp US this year is WordCamp Europe in Paris, France. That's on June 15th through the 17th. And I believe you're going to that one, right?
That's the plan.
All right, that's the plan. And then the week after that, June 24th through the 25th, is WordCamp Kent, Ohio. I will be there. I will be in attendance, pretty much in my backyard, so I kind of have to go. And then WordCamp Kyoto, Japan, 24th through the 25th, and WordCamp Nagpur in India is also on the 24th and 25th. So you got 3 different WordCamps on the same weekend. And then in Kanpur, India, on July 9th, you will also have a WordCamp, and then the first ever WordCamp in Washington, D.C. will take place July 14th through the 16th. And if you want to check out some of the other upcoming events, because there's more, just check out central.wordcamp.org, and then up at the top, click on the or hover over the schedule menu icon. You'll see a list that says upcoming WordCamps. Or if you upgrade, I can't tell you about that yet, but when you upgrade to WordPress 4.8, if you just type in your city, there's in the news widget, it'll actually tell you where there's an upcoming WordCamp or WordPress meetup nearby.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler. Yeah, so there you have it. So that's going to do it for this episode of WordPress Weekly. Wow. Boy, do we have a lot to talk about. We could have went on for another hour, I bet.
Can't stop, won't stop. We'll just keep recording and see what happens.
So you can find show notes for this episode on wptavern.com, along with show notes for every other episode of WordPress Weekly. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jeffro, JEFFR0. And John?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at JJJ. You can read my blog at jjj.blog. And find me on the internet. Let's be friends.
Let's be friends. I like it. That's like the BB's motto. Let's be friends.
It is the BB's. Let's be friends. Let's be friends. Aw. Everybody have a safe, enjoyable rest of the week. I'm happy it's a short weekend. Or a short week, I should say. Short week, yeah. Yeah, short week. So we'll talk to you again next Wednesday afternoon. Until then, so long, everybody.